Welcome back to the Deep Dive. It is great to have you with us.
Good to be here.
So today, we're tackling a story that is, it's the bedrock for a massive chunk of Western history. It's really the ultimate turnaround story.
Oh, it's the definition of a come to Jesus moment. Quite literally.
Literally. Yeah. We are talking about the Road to Damascus. I think everyone, knows the basic beats of it. Saul of Tarsus, angry persecutor, is riding along.
Gets knocked off his horse by a blinding light.
Right. And stands up as Paul the Apostle. It's this classic redemption arc. It's safe. It's inspiring. It's what you learned in Sunday school.
Mm-hmm.
But, well, the stack of sources we have in front of us today, they're asking us to look at this event through a completely different lens.
It's less Sunday school and, more crime scene investigation.
Exactly. The sources we're diving into, they treat the account in the book of Acts not as some settled theological fact, but as a piece of evidence, something that needs to be cross-examined.
Right.
And the mission for this deep dive is pretty heavy. We are exploring let's say, controversial theory presented in these documents, that the vision Paul experienced, well, it might not have been who he thought it was.
And I know that sounds provocative, but we aren't just reading Acts in a vacuum here. We're holding it up against Jewish tradition, against Greek history, and this is the most critical part, against specific warnings found in the Gospels themselves.
So when you actually line up the timeline and the geography,
Things get complicated.
and just to give you a roadmap of where we're going, this theory really relies on three main pillars of evidence. We've got location discrepancies, invisible bodies, and a literary quote that I gotta say it honestly blew my mind when I first read it.
Oh, the literary quote is the smoking gun. It links the Jewish Messiah to a pagan party god, but we'll get there.
Let's start with the geography then. Chapter 1, location, 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 or as the source puts it, the desert problem.
Right. So to understand why the location is a problem, we have to go back to the source material in the Gospels.
Yeah.
Specifically, Matthew chapter 24. This is a critical text. Yeshua, Jesus, is sitting on the Mount of Olives.
Mm-hmm.
And his disciples ask him, just point blank, what will be the sign of your coming?
So he's giving them the roadmap for his return.
Exactly. He's giving them very specific instructions on what to look for, and maybe even more importantly, what not to look for. He issues this warning about false messiahs and false reports.
Okay.
And he says this very specifically. If they say to you, look, he is in the desert, do not go out.
Do not go out. That seems pretty categorical.
It's a direct command. If the report is the Messiah is in the wilderness, it's a false alarm. Do not engage. Do not believe it.
Okay, so let's fast forward a few years to the book of Acts. Where is Paul?
He is on the road from Jerusalem to Damascus. Now, historically and geographically, that road runs directly through the Syrian wilderness. The text itself describes it as a desert region.
So, Paul is in the desert. He sees a light. He meets a spiritual entity that claims to be the Messiah.
Right. If you take the warning in Matthew 24 literally, Paul is doing exactly what Jesus was told not to do. He's entertaining a report of the Messiah in the desert.
But the source material, it goes deeper into why the desert is so important, right?
Yeah.
It's not just about the sand.
No, it's about spiritual territory. And you saw this, they brought up the Zohar.
Yes, Jewish mysticism.
In Jewish tradition, the wilderness, the midbar, it has this really heavy symbolic weight. It's described as the abode of the other side, the domain of the adversary.
The adversary being...
Satan. Satan, yes. The wilderness is viewed as his home turf. And the source lists these fascinating precedents for this. Remember the rebellion of Korach in the Torah, where the ground just swallows them up?
That was in the wilderness.
The whole incident with the golden calf.
Wilderness.
And even in the Gospels, when Jesus himself is tempted, where does the Spirit drive him?
Into the wilderness. That's where the showdown happens.
Exactly. The idea is that the desert is where the accuser is strongest. It's a place of chaos, of demonic activity in that ancient worldview. So the argument this source is making is, look, if you're having a spiritual encounter in the desert, you need to be extremely skeptical.
Because traditionally, that's where the bad guys operate.
That's their turf.
It definitely sets a spooky tone.
Yeah.
It really changes the scene from, like, a holy encounter to something potentially dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
But there's another layer to this whole road imagery. The source draws this really specific parallel to a character from the Old Testament named Balaam. Now, for those who might have skipped that day in Bible study, let's unpack who Balaam was.
The Balaam connection is fascinating because the narrative arc is almost identical to Paul's. Balaam was a Gentile prophet, this is in the book of Numbers, and he was hired to curse the Israelites. So he gets on his donkey and sets off.
So his whole mission is to harm God's people.
Correct. And Paul, he's on his way to Damascus with letters from the high priest, authorizing him to arrest, imprison, and essentially destroy the disciples of Yeshua.
So both on a road, both in the wilderness, both on a mission to harm the faithful.
And both are stopped on that road by a spiritual encounter.
Now, in the version I know, Balaam's donkey stops because it sees the angel of the Lord.
That is the translation we usually see. The angel of the Lord stood in the way. But the source points out something very specific about the Hebrew text there.
Oh,
The word used for what stood in Balaam's way is Satan.
really? It actually uses the word Satan.
It says lil Satan, which means as an adversary. Now, standard theology interprets this as God's angel acting as an adversary to stop Balaam from sinning. That's the charitable reading.
But the source is asking us to look at the pattern.
Right. Just because someone is stopped on a road and their path is changed, it doesn't automatically mean the entity stopping them is benevolent. Balaam was stopped by an adversary. The source suggests Paul might have been too.
That's a heavy implication. It suggests that being stopped in your tracks isn't always a sign of divine intervention. It could be interference.
Precisely. And if the desert, is the adversary's domain, then that interference becomes very suspect.
Okay, so we have the desert problem. But let's look at the vision itself, because the source argues that even the description of what happened to Paul is, well, it's messy.
It's incredibly inconsistent, and this is something biblical scholars have wrestled with for centuries. We actually have 3 different accounts of this event in the book of Acts, chapter 9, chapter 22, and chapter 26.
And they don't line up.
Not on the key details, no. In Acts chapter 9, Luke writes that the men traveling with Paul stood speechless because they heard a voice but saw no one.
Okay, heard a voice, saw nothing. Audio, no video. Got it.
But then you jump to Acts 22, and Paul is retelling the story to a crowd in Jerusalem, and he says, "My companions saw the light, but they did not understand the voice of him who spoke to me." The Greek there implies they didn't hear it, or didn't hear it clearly.
So it flips. First they hear but don't see. Then they see but don't hear.
Exactly. It completely flips. And you might say, okay, minor details, eyewitness testimony is always a bit shaky. But the source compares this confusion against what it calls the lightning standard from Matthew 24.
The lightning standard. Is that from the same warning passage we were just talking about?
It is. Back to Jesus on the Mount of Olives, he says, "For as lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be."
Meaning it's going to be undeniable.
Undeniable and public, visible to everyone. When lightning flashes across the sky, you don't have guys on the ground arguing about whether they saw it or just heard a rumble. It's a cosmic event.
So the true return isn't supposed to be some secret meeting in the desert where your friends are all confused about what just happened.
Exactly. But there's a deeper philosophical issue here about what Paul actually saw. And this brings us to the whole ghost versus resurrection debate. This is the part that I think requires a little bit of a mental shift for us modern listeners.
All right, the source brings up doubting Thomas. And I have to say, I've always felt a bit bad for Thomas. He gets such a bad rap as the cynic of the group.
He really does. But the source makes this great argument that Thomas wasn't doubting in a negative way. He was being a rigorous student of theology. You have to understand the massive clash happening at that time between the Greek worldview and the Jewish worldview.
Okay, break that down for us. What's the conflict?
Okay, so in the Greek view, specifically Platonism, which influenced the whole Roman world matter, is considered evil. The physical world is low, dirty, decaying. The spiritual world is high and pure. So in Greek thought, if you're a good spirit or a god, you'd never want a physical body.
You want to be incorporeal.
A ghost.
A ghost, exactly. You want to escape the body. But Judaism is the opposite. It teaches that God created the physical world and called it good. Matter isn't evil. It's holy potential.
So the Jewish concept of resurrection
Is deeply physical. Think of the valley of dry bones in Ezekiel. It's bones, tendons, flesh, breath, a real touchable body. So when Thomas says, "I won't believe until I put my finger in the nail marks,"
He isn't saying, "I don't believe you came back." He's testing the nature of the entity. He's asking, is this a Greek ghost, which would be a deception, or is this a Jewish resurrection? He's demanding physical proof because that confirms it's really the Messiah.
and Jesus lets him do it.
Yes, he says, "Handle me and see, for a spirit has not flesh and bones as you see me have. He eats fish. He proves he has a body."
Now bring this back to Paul on the road to Damascus.
Paul's vision fails the Thomas test completely. Paul sees a light, he hears a voice, he sees no body, he never touches anything.
It fits the Greek model.
Perfectly. An incorporeal voice from the sky fits the pagan Greek expectation of a spirit guide, but it does not fit the Jewish standard of a resurrected Messiah that Thomas was so careful to verify.
So if you're keeping score, we've got the wrong location, the desert. We have the wrong form of corporeal light instead of a body.
Yeah.
But then we get to the part that actually made my jaw drop. The source calls this one the smoking gun.
This is the part that usually makes people stop the recording and go look it up for themselves.
It's about what the voice actually says to Paul. So Paul is on the ground, blinded. And in Acts 26.1 feet, he recounts that the voice spoke to him in the Hebrew tongue and said, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? It is hard for thee to kick against the pricks.
Kick against the pricks, or in some translations, kick against the goads. It's a very memorable phrase.
It sounds profound. It sounds like ancient folk wisdom.
It is ancient. But here's the problem. It is not from the Bible. It's not from the Torah. It's not from the prophets. It isn't even a common Jewish idiom at all.
No say. Where is it from?
That phrase is a direct word-for-word quote from a Greek play called the Bacchae by Euripides.
Wait, hold on. A play? Like the theater?
A famous Greek tragedy written about 400 years before Paul. And not just any play. The Bacchae is essentially a propaganda piece for the worship of Dionysus.
Dionysus, the party god.
We think of him as the party god, but that's the sanitized version. Dionysus was the god of wine, yes, but also madness, ritual ecstasy, religious frenzy. The play is about Dionysus coming to earth in disguise and punishing a King Pentheus who refuses to worship him.
And in the play, Dionysus says that line.
Yes. There's a scene where Dionysus, the pagan god, is confronting the king who's trying to arrest him, and Dionysus says, "You are angry, but you should not be, for it is hard for thee to kick against the pricks."
So let me get this straight. The voice that Paul hears on the road to Damascus, the voice claiming to be the Jewish Messiah, is quoting a pagan play about the god of orgies.
That is the reality of the text. It's a direct citation. And the source argues this is absolutely mind-boggling when you consider the historical context. We have to talk about the Maccabees.
Right, the story of Hanukkah.
Exactly. This is where we need to remember the context from our previous deep dive on Alexander and Hellenized Jews. Remember that conflict between the Hellenizers and the Hasidim?
The culture war, yeah.
This isn't ancient history to Paul. This is recent history. The Maccabee Rebellion was a war fought just a couple of centuries prior. And it wasn't just a war over land. It was a war against the imposition of Greek gods.
And specifically, didn't the Greek king, Antiochus Epiphanes, force the Jews to worship Dionysus?
He did. That was the ultimate abomination.
Yeah.
Antiochus marched into Jerusalem, defiled the temple, and forced the Jews to participate in Dionysian processions. They were forced to wear ivy wreaths, the symbol of Dionysus, and walk in honor of this god of madness.
So the entire struggle for Jewish independence, the reason they celebrate Hanukkah, was a struggle against the worship of Dionysus.
Correct. So for the Jewish Messiah, the supposed deliverer of Israel, to appear and, quote, the script of the oppressor.
It's an insult.
It's beyond an insult. It is historically tone deaf, the source argues. Why would a rabbi from Galilee raised on the Torah, quote, a pagan playwright like Euripides, and why would he quote a play that celebrates the very idolatry his people fought and died to resist?
And the text says he spoke in the Hebrew tongue.
Right. Yes. Acts specifies in the Hebrew tongue, which makes it even weirder. He's translating a Greek poetic line into Hebrew. It suggests that either the author of Acts was just trying to show off his knowledge of Greek literature to impress his readers, or
the entity speaking to Paul wasn't who Paul thought it was.
It opens the door to the idea that the entity was familiar with Greek culture, comfortable with pagan literature, and perhaps even mocking the listener.
That brings us to the meaning of the phrase itself. Kick against the pricks. It sounds painful. What does it actually mean?
Well, it's agricultural imagery. A prick, or a goad, is a sharp, spiked stick used to drive oxen or cattle. If the ox resists, if it kicks back against the driver, it just drives the spike deeper into its own flesh.
So the metaphor is, I am the driver, you are the dumb beast, do what I say or you get hurt.
Exactly. It implies a master-slave relationship. The deity drives the human like cattle, submission through pain.
Which feels very different from how Jesus spoke in the Gospels.
It is a massive theological clash. Think about Jesus Yeshua. He taught his disciples to call God Abba, Father. He called them friends, not servants. He said, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light."
He didn't treat people like beasts of burden to be whipped into submission.
No. He led sheep. He didn't drive cattle. But the entity on the road to Damascus, that entity used the language of domination. You are kicking against the goad.
And this aligns with some of those other contradictions the source highlights between Yeshua's teachings and Paul's later writings. We've talked about some of these before.
All right, the disconnect is significant. You see Yeshua teaching that the law, the Torah, will not pass away until heaven and earth disappear. Then you see Paul seemingly arguing that the law is a curse or has been abolished.
And there's that issue of personal integrity we saw in the source material from Acts 21.
Exactly. The source points out that Acts depicts Paul engaging in, well, deception. He goes to Jerusalem and performs a purification ritual specifically to convince the apostles that he still keeps the Torah.
He's pretending to be observant just to smooth things over.
Right. While at the same time, in his letters to the Galatians and others, he's telling them that anyone who relies on the works of the law is under a curse. The source argues this is a character issue.
So if you have a figure who operates through deception and a vision that uses the language of domination kicking against the goad, it paints a picture of a very different character than the Jesus of the Gospels.
It really does. And the source essentially boils all this down to three possibilities.
Let's hear them.
Option one, the author of Acts, Luke, just made it up. He was writing for a Greek audience, so he embellished the story with a cool quote from Euripides to make it sound literary and impressive.
Plausible, but that's a huge problem if you believe in biblical inerrancy. It means the text is basically fiction.
Option two, Yeshua underwent a radical personality change after the ascension. He went from love your enemies and Father forgive them to quoting pagan plays and blinding people in the desert to force them into submission.
Which seems unlikely if, the text says he is the same yesterday, today, and forever.
And then there's option three, the one the source is pushing us to consider, however uncomfortable it might be.
That Paul was actually talking to the adversary in the desert.
If you line it up, the location is the desert, the adversary's traditional domain. The method stopping a persecutor on the road parallels the adversary stopping Balaam. The form incorporeal light fits the deceptive spirits the Greeks knew, not the Jewish resurrection. And the dialogue, it's straight from the mouth of a pagan god.
It's a terrifying thought.
Yeah.
Because if that's true, it changes the entire trajectory of the early church. Paul wrote, half the New Testament?
It suggests that the Christianity that developed from Paul's vision might be fundamentally different from the way that Yeshua taught his original disciples. It suggests a hijacking, a pivot from a Jewish renewal movement to a mystery religion based on a disembodied spirit.
It's certainly a lot to process. We usually look at the road to Damascus as the moment the light turned on. But this perspective suggests it might have been the moment a different kind of darkness crept in.
It challenges us to read the text closely. We assume we know these stories, we've heard them 1,000 times. But when you actually audit the details, the geography, the specific Greek words used, it opens up a completely different understanding.
So let's recap this deep dive. We have a meeting in the desert, which Jesus specifically warned his disciples to ignore. We have a figure with no body, which fails the Thomas test for a true resurrection. We have a parallel to Balaam being stopped by an adversary.
And the supposed Messiah quoting a play about ritual madness and pagan worship.
It is a stack of evidence that is hard to ignore once you see it. It really demands an explanation. And that leads us to the final question, the one the source leaves us with. And I really want you, the listener, to sit with this one.
If the figure on the road to Damascus quoted a play celebrating madness and pagan ritual and appeared in the one place, the desert, where Yeshua said not to look, then who is Paul actually talking to?
I think we'll leave it there. Check the sources, read the texts for yourself, dig into Acts in Euripides. It is always deeper than you think. Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive.
See you next time.